Welcome to Generations, a show which helps people 50 and better lead happy, healthy, and productive lives. Hosting today's episode is Nadia Giordana, and here's Nadia.
Hello and welcome to Generations, the Roundtable edition. We have a fun subject today, the 1960s, and we'll be talking about what we remember of that decade. And co-hosting with me today, Elly Freed.
Hi, I'm glad to be here.
And glad to have you here too. And Karen Riesett. Hi, Karen.
Hi, Nadia.
Gail, Roddy.
Hi,
Welcome,
Nadia.
Gail. And Jeanne Rogers, my idol. Jeanne has been a host on this show for many years. And Stella Lundquist. Welcome, Stella.
Good afternoon.
Who wants to start out? Who's got a memory? Okay, go ahead, Jeanne.
Because we've got this wonderful list from our director of all the stuff that went on during the 60s, and I thought most of them I forgot. Many of them I never heard of them, but there was one that I remembered, and it's this one, that in 1960 in North Carolina, the first lunch counter that you could sit up at in the Walgreens stores got started.
Woolworths.
And I remember in downtown Minneapolis where I lived, it's like everybody went to Woolworths to have lunch.
I remember that
That's where you went, you know. And of course, people today, they don't know what Woolworths is to begin with, and a lunch counter, then, you know, can't even imagine that. But I remember that.
And you need to have a hamburger and a malted milk at the counter.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Chocolate.
Or ice cream sundae.
Ice cream sundaes were wonderful too.
Yep.
Yeah, they did that. And they would have what they called a soda jerk, didn't they?
Yes.
Yeah. I think that's a throwover from the 50s, but they had it plenty in the 60s.
They did indeed. But that was so much fun to see that on the list, and I thought of all the things I forgot or couldn't even remember. I thought, that one I know.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I think the 60s were a memorable era for me because I graduated from college in 1963. So I was a young person just full of vim and vigor, you know, and nothing could touch me or hurt me. And I listened to John Kennedy's words, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. And I joined the Peace Corps. And I went to Turkey. Went first to Brattleboro, Vermont, and I studied Turkish for 3 months. And then I went to Turkey, and I lived in a village where no one spoke English, and no electricity, and no running water, and had a wonderful experience. And it's just really, I think, stayed with me my entire life in one way or another.
Sure it would.
And then I came back from that, having sort of gotten rid of all my adventuresome needs, and had my first child. And so,
how long were you there?
2 years. Yeah. So, and I traveled all over, and fortunately, I traveled to many of the areas that are now war-torn. So I traveled all over Turkey, and I went to Lebanon and Damascus, Syria, and to Jordan, and all those places and all the famous sites there before there was war.
There was trouble, yeah.
And it really makes it sort of memorable that way too, because it's changed a lot now.
Having been there, it helps you when you see now what's happening. I think it brings it a little closer to home, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. I have more of an understanding of the issues there too.
Yeah.
In 2 years, you must have learned Turkish pretty well.
I did.
Having to be immersed like that, that's how you learn it really well.
Yeah, because, you know, when I was dropped off in my village, literally, Peace Corps just put us in a cab and said, you know, you're going. And the people there, you know, knew that I was coming, and that helped a lot. But no one spoke English. So if I was going to eat or find a place to sleep that night, you know, I was going to have to start speaking Turkish.
Oh my God, amazing.
Fantastic.
Quite an experience.
What kind of jobs did you have then? Were you a nurse or, you know?
No, we were AB generalists. We were all these liberal arts graduates from all over these, you know, universities in the U.S. And we went to a village, and our job was to help the villagers do some development work, community development. And in my case, you know, I raised chickens, and I canned tomatoes, and I had a child care program, and CARE organization provided us with powdered milk, and I'd mix that all up for the kids, and the mothers would come in, and I could talk to the mothers then about first aid and issues of nutrition with their children and so on.
I was wondering, did you ever find out about what was going on in the United States at that time? Was there any connections that you could find out, you know, what we were doing, what our news was, you know?
Well, that was a challenge. I did have a shortwave radio, so I could hear Voice of America. And I also, the Peace Corps sent us the New York Herald Tribune International Edition, and that would come to my mailbox in the town. I would have to go once a week and open it up, and there would be a week's worth of newspapers.
Do you remember anything specific that was going on at the United States?
Well,
that kind of, you know.
What I do remember, especially because then when I got back, I was looking at this list that our director provided us, and I realized that between 1964 and 1966, when I was out of the country, I don't remember a lot of what was happening. And the one thing when I got back, which was interesting in '64, the Beatles had become very popular. And when I got back, you know, everybody was saying, "Oh, the Beatles, you gotta have this, you gotta do this, you gotta listen to all this. This is just terrific." And I said, "Who are the Beatles?" I have no idea who the Beatles are. So there was a lot that I missed, but you know, in the meantime, I was learning more about the world.
So can you say something?
I can say merhaba, which means hello, and then I'll ask you nasılsınız, how are you? And you all said you were fine, so you could say iyiyim, and then you can say teşekkür ederim, which is thank you.
Oh my. Oh, how wonderful to know a second language. I remember being glued to the television set when the first man on the moon, I sat there through the whole thing, hour after hour, whatever was on the television, and watched that, just mesmerized at what was happening.
We were camping when that happened up at Alexandria, and my sister and her family and our family. Someone on the campground brought a little portable TV. So everyone was gathered around this campsite looking at this little tiny TV
screen.
That was amazing, though. It was an
That's as
amazing
exciting as it gets.
Yeah.
We were watching it, and I remember my uncle saying, "I don't know, somebody might come from behind that rock and start blasting." I'll never forget that, and we all kind of went, you know, I mean, because after all, they were on somebody else's territory. You never know who was there. But that was so funny. He said it matter-of-factly.
But it's interesting how they couldn't walk. They had to jump. Don't you remember that? They were jumping. There was something about the
gravity.
The gravity that must have, you know, made it so they couldn't walk. So.
Yeah, it was quite the time. And well, who was the first man? Neil Armstrong. He was the first man who set foot on the moon.
Right.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
I was looking at this Alfred Hitchcock Psycho release. I was too young to see it.
That was 1960, wasn't it?
60 or 61, and I remember it coming out, and there was just this, it was just so horrible that you couldn't see it unless you were 18. And I think I was 8 or 9, and I remember thinking, I can't wait to see that movie. And I think it was maybe 67 or 8 when I finally saw it, but I remember that was just a big controversy, and now that movie is nothing compared to what we've seen.
It's still something.
It's still scary to you.
I was old enough to see it when it first came out. It was awful.
The memory is something.
A lot of his pictures were awful in that respect.
Oh yeah.
Well done.
Yes.
But not anything as bad as what they show today. I mean,
big difference. Big difference. I have to turn some shows off. I just can't do it.
Absolutely.
But I'd like to mention, you know, I was raising my 8 children at that time, and some of the interesting things that today would be horrid. like we didn't have seat belts in cars.
Yeah.
And I remember one time I had to make a real fast stop. I had all 8 kids in the car. The kids that were in the back seat flew into our front seat. And that was terrible. And one of my kids bumped his head on the windshield, and I keep on thinking, he's all right, thank goodness.
Well, it was the mark of a good parent to be quick about going like this and putting your arm out to protect your children. It's just the way it was, and we accepted that.
But do you remember the big station wagons with the seat facing the back door with the window? We had one of those, and we sat back there. And when I think about it today, with that window down, and if you stopped, you know,
right out.
You could have gone right out. We never did. But as you say, there were no seat belts. There were no seat belts in the car.
That same thing happened to me. And this, I think this is a 60s expression. I was driving down the street and someone copped a left in front of me. Do you remember copped a left?
Yeah.
And I slammed on the brakes and the kids all came forward, hit the back of the front seat. It's awful.
Yep, so I used to worry about their brains.
Some things are better today, that's for sure.
But then with my kids, though, I had one that had an afro, you know, those big afros. He had a big afro, and he still has to this day. He's got very curly hair, so he almost has to have an afro. And then my kids wore, do you remember those giant elephant pants?
Yes,
they
I had a
bloused
pair.
out way at the, at the bottom. And that kind of.
I thought they were called bell-bottom trousers.
Well, those
they
are
were
modest.
They were
Those came out at the bottom. These came like from the knees way out. I just found a picture of my daughter Julie with those on.
You could hardly walk in them. They were cute.
Two big skirts on your legs. They were called elephant pants. I had one pair. And that was similar, that was with blue jeans. Elephant pants were blue jeans. Palazzo pants, which are still around for dress, they were usually black and fancy material for evening wear, but somewhat similar. But I think that's when they started.
I see on this list that the mini skirt first appeared in 1965.
Mini skirts, go-go boots, and go-go dancers.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
I was home raising my children too. My first 3, 2 were born in 57 and 8, and then 1 in 61. So I had those 3 little kids. But one of the big things that happened that isn't on the list here is the opening of Vatican II, the Second Vatican Council, which had a lot of influence on the world, and started better relationships between different faiths, and all that.
I remember that.
Yeah, and it went from October of '62 to December of 65. So that was a long thing, and we followed that pretty closely.
I don't remember that.
That's when all the ecumenical things used to start happening. It was we were just beginning to where Lutherans and Protestants and Baptists and Catholics would all be going to the same event, where in the past everybody was separate.
And they were all talking to each other and finding common things that they believed in. So that was a good thing.
And I think we had, by then, we had the polio vaccine. I think that was I don't remember the exact date, but I remember getting the polio vaccine, so we had a vaccine for that, and in the 50s that was different. And smallpox was in there too. I remember we were getting vaccinated for that, and that may have been around a little bit. But I remember that, you know, those were standard. You got those vaccinations.
My family were guinea pigs for the polio shots, and I remember that so well. We had not only shots, they also experimented with us with a drink. So the experiment, and what it is that we were living in University Village at that time, and my husband was going to school, and so we were the perfect guinea pigs, because right across the street was the public health building where they were doing this testing. So it was not only adults that went through it, it was children too. But it was not just the shots, it was also the drinks we had.
I think smallpox vaccinations, I had that when I was a child.
So that was earlier.
So that was way early.
Well, I couldn't remember. I just remember getting one.
Oh yeah, those are the ones that left the big scars on our skin. Because I still
kind
have
of
that. I didn't have that right.
They took a needle and did a couple little pokes, and then you got a red.
But you got a big, scar. You know.
And so, do you remember that we didn't get that many vaccinations like they do today?
No, they get a lot.
There were fewer, yes.
I don't remember getting very many at all, and I asked my mother just recently because all this controversy about them is coming up, and she couldn't remember either, because it literally was that we would go and over to someone's house who had chicken pox because they wanted you to get it.
I remember that.
Yes, they wanted you to get chicken pox as kids. Yeah.
The younger the better, that was the thinking.
Oh, okay. The sooner you get it.
Yeah, because it was worse if you were older. And
Yeah, thanks a lot. Now that we're older, we've all got the virus in us.
Yeah, for shingles.
I got shingles, I think, 4 times since I've been a senior.
Dear.
Oh, yeah.
My.
And I got the shot so that you wouldn't get them or it would stop you from getting them, and it wasn't a matter of weeks before I had it, maybe the third time.
My goodness. That's interesting.
It is.
Yeah.
And, you know, there was also a time I remember when Kennedy got shot. Do you remember that?
And later his brother Bobby.
Exactly, and then also the guy that shot him, and those people got shot. It was just awesome. It was a period of time where we were just glued to our TVs. And one of my sons, when I talked about it recently, and they said, you know, Mom, I remember coming home from school, and I could see in all the windows of the houses, everybody had their TVs on, and the streets were quieter. People were not so much out shopping and stuff. They were watching everything on TV.
We were just glued to the TV for several days. That was really a very standout kind of event, and it probably has affected our society for many, many years. And the same with Robert Kennedy's death, of course. And then, you know, there were an awful lot of civil rights kinds of things going on during these 60s years.
Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech.
Now, were all you ladies here in the Midwest in the 60s?
I was.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm asking because this 16th Street Baptist Church bombing, it seems to me, I mean, I remember growing up in St. Paul, and because I'm African American, we knew all about it. But as I've grown older, a lot of my Caucasian peers didn't hear about it.
Where was that?
It was in Birmingham, Alabama.
Or if I did hear about it, I've since
Right.
You know, it didn't make the impression that if I'd have lived in that state, it would have.
And you know, I was a college student in much of the 60s here, and you know, with my sort of activist side of my life, I was out demonstrating for civil rights marches and anti-Vietnam and a lot of the turmoil during this era. You know, I was politically involved and reacting to as a young person, and, but at the time it was quite common to have demonstrations and protests and marches and so on.
A lot of stuff going on for civil rights, and then of course afterward, out of that came the women's movement. That was into the 70s, but it came out of all that activism with the war and civil rights and everything in the 60s.
That's when I became involved in politics too, and still am. You know, it's that kind of thing that gets you out of the house. You know, something's got to be done. I've got to see what I can do. So, yes.
Well, and does anybody remember the New York City blackout?
Oh, yes.
And
that was
all the babies that followed. That was
But we were kind of sitting and waiting for it to get to the Midwest. You know, don't you remember it kind of was creeping gradually?
That's right.
And I think it stopped in Ohio. I met, in fact, one time I was on a train for something, and I met one of the electricians who was involved in stopping it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Because it did travel.
I think it stopped in Ohio, but that was spooky, scary.
It was.
So every time they talk about the electrical grid now, I think, it happened once before, right?
We think about that when we hear about the grid.
And every once in a while they'll show someone working on that grid with the long tunnels of wires and stuff. It's amazing. It would be, you know, I kind of wish they wouldn't show that. Someone might be watching who...
And you know, it's interesting that the music of the time, I remember seeing a Saturday Night Live skit in the 1960s where they were making a joke or doing a parody of a rock band, but they were all senior citizens, and we thought that was the most hilarious thing in the world. And now you look out there and here's Mick Jagger and all these other rock bands that are still performing, and it's art. You know what I'm trying to say.
But you know, it reminds me of Woodstock, which I think probably started all of that stuff. So my husband had an aunt who was involved in Woodstock, and she was an artist. There actually is a Woodstock museum up near the town of Woodstock, which has artwork and has the music and all, you know, the pictures and things like that.
Did you go to Woodstock? Did anybody here get to
No. I didn't. No.
I remember the folk song era. And, you know, Pete Seeger and all those wonderful folk songs, you know, this land is your land, this land is my land. You know.
Bob Dylan, Joan Baez.
Yeah, Bob Dylan from Minnesota.
That's right.
A lot of good music came
And he's still
out.
around. He's still alive. He's still alive.
Yeah, he
Bob
is.
Dylan is.
Yeah, he's coming back to Minnesota, or he was. I can't remember.
He does every once in a while. I guess they finally have a museum up in the town that he grew up in. And I think that would make him happy to come and visit once in a while.
I think that would be good, yeah.
And you know, you mentioned, you know, the Johnny Carson show on this list of stuff that we have from our director. It says that in the 60s, Johnny Carson takes over the Tonight Show, and my question is, who had it before him? In my lifetime, it was
Jack Parr.
Jack Parr.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
I remember that. Yeah.
Wow.
Yes, yes.
Television really impacted my life, too, during that time. And I think, you know, my family probably didn't have a television until, I guess, maybe the late 50s. And I'm not real sure, but in the 60s, we were following a lot on television. News, you know, certain programs that were favorites. Ed Sullivan, you know, who brought the Beatles and everything going on.
Saturday night at the movies on TV.
Oh, yes.
That was a big deal for me.
And the Walt Disney Hour.
Oh, Walt Disney.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I watched Captain Kangaroo a lot.
He was in Minnesota. Wasn't that Minnesota, or was that national?
No, that was national.
That was national.
Yeah. But Sesame Street started in the 60s, too. I don't remember.
I remember that because when it came onto television, I had a little one, and I thought it was just the most fantastic show. I liked it as much.
I still like it.
Yes. Yeah, I still do.
I watch it with grandchildren sometimes.
It's a timeless show. I see you have here where you were just talking about Mick Jagger, the Rolling Stones, I can't get no satisfaction. I remember him saying years ago that he will not be singing that at 50 years old. He refuses. And now he's, what, 72? And he's still singing it. Still singing it. Can you imagine how many thousands of times he sung that song?
There had to be a lot.
Any of those older performers.
Yes.
And still, there's a commercial on right now from Barnes & Noble, and they're singing, I don't know if it's Baby It's Cold Outside or what it is, but it's, I can't pull up his name.
Oh, you're talking about Lady Gaga and
Tony Bennett.
Tony Bennett.
Tony Bennett.
And you know what just amazed me is that Tony Bennett still is that attractive looking gentleman.
He's so handsome.
Yes. And isn't he like 82 or 4 or something?
Yeah.
He's in there.
He's in there. But I think
He's young.
That's my goal, to be in my 80s and still vibrant like that, and be on national TV and still making money. I mean, that's just
that part would be really
coolest
good.
thing. It's just the coolest thing.
And flower power and the hippies. I was married and had a young family, so I couldn't quite call myself a hippie in the true sense. But I kind of wanted to be.
And you know, in those days too, my husband was a doctor, so I would have the interest. That was in the times when they had the first heart transplant.
Yes.
And you know, now they transplant everything. It seems. You want an ear? Do you want a nose?
But that heart transplant was big.
That was big.
And that was here in Minnesota also, right?
so.
Yes,
Yeah.
I think Minnesota's connected with it. You know, doctors oftentimes work across states with each other, and so that I'm sure Minnesota doctors were involved, and I do think it was in Minnesota.
Yeah, I think you're right. That was a huge thing.
Yeah, it was.
Oh, and remember they had him hooked up to those huge machines that I'll never forget seeing that on TV where they wheeled him out in a wheelchair and he was just hooked up to everything. But he was smiling. He was happy to be alive.
I know. We heard about that doctor for years to come, too.
Christian Bernard.
Yes.
That's
Is that his name?
There you go. Yeah, that's
glad
right.
you thought of it.
Yeah.
And you know what I think is amazing too, but I don't know the year. This is just coming into my mind right now. That so many people don't know. And it might have been like during World War II when blood plasma was created, and it was by an African American doctor. And I think probably hardly anybody knows that because so many, you know, way back when, if you were African American, you didn't get credit for anything unless maybe you were a singer that in showbiz. People got to know who you were.
And that was a medical breakthrough.
It was a medical.
I
mean, they were keeping people alive on this artificial blood. It's amazing.
Well, the same thing with not the 60s, but ultrasound. You know, my kids have had ultrasound when they're expecting a baby, and that started with sonar on naval ships. You know?
Submarines.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And some unknown person connected that. I don't know who.
Probably
it
a
is,
woman. That was another thing that women didn't get credit for, for a lot, too.
That's true. And the Six-Day War was in the 1960s. I forget exactly which year, but that kind of started all of our knowledge and understanding and watching of what's happening over there and continues to this day.
That was an awesome war, really, where this tiny, tiny country of, you know, of Israel could possibly fight off all of these people all the way around it.
Yeah,
so,
that really was
just amazing.
Something. And we're right down to the last few seconds, less than a half a minute or so left. And thank you, ladies, for being here and joining in on this conversation. We could go on for a lot longer because there's a lot more we could talk about.
Yes.
And thank you all for watching Generations, the Roundtable edition.